He says, I'm going to place down in the basement where they used to store ammunition and stuff. I guess down in the basement.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
It's raining. It's kind of somber atmosphere. Gotta make sure you're awake. I'm gonna do it again, okay? Good evening.
Good evening.
See, that's what I want to happen. Are you guys pumped?
Yeah.
You've got to be excited. This is the first full symphony concert of the festival. I'm very, very happy and honored to be giving you your pre-concert lectures again this year. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the privilege of serving the National Music Festival as a violin mentor as well as the festival's explicator. Yeah, I don't know what it means either. But Richard gave me this fancy title, and he told me that he wanted me to talk before each of the concerts. I've done this for a few years for Richard now, and no one has complained thus far, so I think he lets me keep doing it. And I want to explain a little bit about my purpose up here on stage talking to you before this concert. What it is that I need you, that I want you to walk away from before you go listen to the music that we've been preparing for you. Because I do this a little differently now. If you came to get a history lecture or a very thorough analysis of the music, which several of you did, it's not going to happen. So I hate to burst your bubble. There's a few people that are going, That's not my goal. I mean, I don't want you to walk away and understand the chordal progressions of the ancient airs and dances. That's not going to help you listen. The goal of this pre-concert lecture series that I do through the festival is to prepare you to be an active audience member in our concerts. And that goes no matter where you're listening to music. You need to be an active participant. We have a really, really bad stigma, particularly in classical music, where we become passive audience members. In other words, you go to a concert because you got the free tickets, someone at church had them, and they can't go now because they got a dinner party, and you show up, and you're like, is there a bar there? Okay, I can go get a drink at intermission. And you sit in the audience, and then what are they playing? Man, it's loud. Why is this one so loud? Oh, it's contemporary, that's why it's loud. I like Beethoven, why did they play Beethoven? And we just kind of let the music come at us and over us, and we're not really actively listening. There's a big misconception with classical music that you're not supposed to know what's happening at the concert. That's so wrong. You're supposed to have expectations when you walk into the hall. You're supposed to know how the piece goes. You're supposed to be able to hum the melodies so that when the conductor and the orchestra do something different, you appreciate what they've done differently. If you've never heard the work before, then you're going to go, oh, that's nice, right? But if you go, wait a minute, that's not like the recording that I have. That's not like what I've listened to. I like giving you this simile. How many Beach Boys fans are there? Are you a Beach Boys fan? Good. It's a great band, right? You didn't just become a fan of the Beach Boys. It's not like one day without ever hearing their music you said, you know, I think I like this thing called the Beach Boys. I think that's something that I would enjoy. I've never heard it, but I think that was something, the Beach Boys. It's got beach in it. Makes sense. You don't just wake up one morning and say, classical music. Yeah, I could go for that. I'll get a donut and then enjoy classical music. It's got classic in it. I'm kind of classic. I think I'd like that. No, you have to be engaged. You listen to Beach Boy records and you saw them in a magazine and maybe you went to a live concert and had expectations. You memorized all the songs. And then when you went shopping in the grocery store one day and it came on over the speaker, you're like, confirmations. Oh, grits are on sale, right? You know the music and you can hum along with it and sing with it. That's what I want you guys to have before you go into the concert. I want you to have an expectation for what you're going to hear. So when you listen to what we've prepared for you, you're going to say, oh, that's different. Oh, that's not what I expected. I had something different in my head. You're going to be an active listener. Everything that we throw at you from our instruments, you're going to grab onto it. You're going to digest it a little bit before you let it float off to the next person. So I think we can accomplish that. I mean, you guys look pretty smart. So I think we're going to do that this evening. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about this evening's concert. And I'm going to be honest with you now. Maestro Rosenberg, he programs the concert series, and then he comes up with these fancy titles that are in your program. My hand is not on those. So beware. I have a lot of people every year that come and ask me and says, this story has no end. What does that mean? I was like, I don't know. What do you think it means? I don't come up with the titles for these lectures. Those are given to me, and I always have this kind of challenge. I feel like I'm playing a game of Clue. I have to figure out why he called these lectures what he did. This year, I kind of gave up on that. I got frustrated because I got to this program and I thought, okay, what am I going to give the audience? What am I going to prepare you with so that you go into this concert and you're actively listening and you're participating? And I was stumped. This is an incredibly eclectic first concert. I mean, you're going to stretch from 1777 to 1936 in terms of the tonal experience that you have. We have a huge gamut available to us musically. Not just the melodies, but the instrumentation, what's happening. Saxophones are on stage. Hold on your wallet, okay? Saxophones are playing with us. It's crazy. There's so much going on in this concert. I thought, man, how does this all tie together? And then I had this huge epiphany. Are you ready for this? Buckle in. This is awesome. I'm excited about it, right? I realized as we're performing these pieces that it's going to give you an excellent interpretation, excellent snapshot, excellent vision of what it is that orchestras can do. So how many people have been to a full symphony orchestra concert? Great. So you've been to a concert, you've heard some of the things they can do. In this one evening, and stretching so many eras and genres, you're going to get an idea of the full extent of our power. Everything that we can accomplish as musicians with our instrument. You're going to hear new techniques and new sounds in some of the more modern works that we have. You're going to hear traditional sounds in the Haydn that we're playing. You're really going to go on this roller coaster of what it is composers can accomplish with orchestra. And what's unique about this concert is that 3 of the pieces that you're going to hear, the Dana Suesse, the Concerto in 3 rhythms, then after intermission, when we get to the Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf, and then the very last piece on the program, how many people studied, was the last thing on the program? The Respighi, right? The Ancient Airs and Dances, Suite number 1. Wrote 3 of them. This is the first one. All of these pieces were not originally for orchestra. Oh, I got a couple of them. So there's your first little tidbit. Don't take notes. Don't take notes. Someone in the back, oh, it's not for orchestra. You'll understand. So it's not for orchestra. The middle 2, Dana Suesse, an incredible American composer and songwriter. How many people have heard of Dana Suesse before? If you don't know her music, she is an incredible legend in terms of classical American music. She was alive and thrived in the early 20th century, female composer, was writing a lot of songs, was in the vaudeville circuit when she was younger. She was a child prodigy. By age 9, she was touring in vaudeville, and she did this act, and I'm so jealous, I love this. She'd be on stage with a 9-year-old girl, and she'd play these amazing rags and kind of, vaudevillian-esque piano pieces. And then she'd get up, and if you can imagine, especially in vaudeville, she had like a huge skirt, little rosy cheeks, and she'd come up and she goes, "Someone give me an idea." And she'd ask for something, sunshine or rain or sadness or love. And she would go to the piano and she would improvise on that idea at 9 years old. Well, this absolutely carried through into her career because she started writing songs for movies and helped write a lot of music for film. So this idea of taking ideas and then encapsulating those into a melody or into a rhythm or into harmony was part of her life from a very, very young age. So she wrote this concerto in 3 rhythms, right, for a very famous band leader, Paul Whiteman. A lot of you guys probably know him. She wrote it right after Gershwin had written Paul, her first name basis, you didn't know that. So right after Gershwin had written Rhapsody in Blue. So this was a big deal. Whiteman goes to her and he says, "I want you to write me a piece. I want it to feature piano. Gershwin just did this. What are you going to do?" And in fact, Dana Suesse was known as the Lady Gershwin. So she writes this concerto in 3 rhythms for piano, and then she has a friend orchestrate it. So this was originally a piano piece, and someone took it and then envisioned it in the eyes of an orchestra with piano. Now tonight, our piano mentor, Elaine Kwan, is going to be a soloist. She's phenomenal. There are not words in the vernacular. You're absolutely going to be blown away by her performance. But what's more important about it is I want you to see and hear this piece being performed with the reality that it was just for piano. What does the arranger, what does it being in the hands of an orchestra do to it? What are the sounds you hear from the orchestra? Do they aid or do they hinder what you hear happening in the piano? Don't just listen to it as if it's a piano concerto. Listen to it with the reality that it was just piano, but now you are hearing it backed up by an orchestra. And does the orchestra do its job well, or does it not? Now, don't tell me at intermission. Well, I thought you could have done better on that last part. Not in that sense, right? I want you to listen to it and judge for yourself whether or not the orchestra is adding to this experience. I think that you find that it does. It's trying to encapsulate 3 specific rhythms. There's 3 movements you're going to hear in the concerto. Concerto for 3 rhythms. The first is a foxtrot. The second is the blues, and the third is a rag. So this is interesting because we're listening to essentially a classical piece, a full symphony orchestra accompanying a piano soloist, but we're talking about a foxtrot, we're talking about the blues, and we're talking about a rag. Is anyone familiar with the work of Nico Schuler? Right? So Schuler is a very important musicologist. He's a horn player, he's a conductor, he's done a lot of things. And he came up with this idea, it's pretty controversial, of this idea of music called third stream music. Have you heard that before? Third stream music. This is music that straddles the fence between being jazz and being classical. And a lot of people disagree with him trying to codify something like that because jazz musicians that use classical techniques sometimes unfairly get placed in that category, and classical musicians that try to break in through jazz get that way. It's hard. The best example I think that needs to be given is someone like Gershwin, who's an American composer. He was writing in classical idiom, but he was strongly influenced by jazz. A lot of French impressionists, a lot of people in the 20th century in France, Debussy specifically, Milla, all these composers were very heavily influenced by what was happening in jazz. And you might not necessarily listen to the piece and immediately think of a saxophone solo in a smoky bar, but they are absolutely being influenced by the musical things happening in jazz. Dana Suesse does this. Now, hers is a little more obvious because when you listen to the first movement of piano concerto and they say it's called a foxtrot, I think that it's obviously heavily influenced by American jazz. But listen to it and try to kind of squint your eyes at it. I want you to think of this more as a classical piece. This is a piano concerto. But what's happening? How does this American composer affect it with her background coming from a vaudeville circuit, turning this concerto into a piece for classical audiences? You're way too excited about it. I can see it, right? I think you're going to really enjoy it. So that's the first piece that you're going to hear in this little journey of the orchestra. After you come back, you're going to hear Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. Now, how many people have seen the Disney version of this? I grew up on it. I love it, okay? Peter and the Wolf is this incredible story, and believe it or not, it's not a concert work. It was not rearranged or changed at all or adapted in order to have the story that goes with it. It was all one thing. Prokofiev had actually taken his children to a local children's theater company in Russia, and he was inspired by what they were doing and the work they were accomplishing. And the director asked him, would you consider writing a piece for the kids to help us in terms of music education and our outreach and what we're trying to do? And Prokofiev fell in love with the idea. He was very excited about writing something that would help introduce the orchestra to young children. He was so excited about it, in fact, that he didn't set a price on the commission. Now, this was a pretty big deal because this would have been around 1936. This is at the height of Prokofiev's career. He could have, written a price at any level, but he told them, look, whatever you can afford, when I get done with it, let's do it that way. In 1 week, some reports say 4 days, others say it took a whole week, he wrote out all of Peter and the Wolf for piano. And one of the first performances was just on piano. After he finished it on piano and he had tested it out and people liked the melodies and the ideas that he had, he took another week. Can you believe it took him 2 weeks? He took another week to arrange it for full orchestra with the specific intent of making a piece that would introduce the orchestra and its varied sounds to a young audience. So, how are we going to experience it? Well, I want you to think of it the same way. Put on this childlike mind and appreciate what Prokofiev accomplishes in Peter and the Wolf. Now, again, the whole goal was to introduce the orchestra. And there is a narrator that says it the entire time. It introduces every idea all the way through the piece. So if you are worried that it's going to go over your head, I promise you it won't, because it's going to say, this is the oboe. And then you're going to hear an oboe. Clarinet. And the clarinet's going to play. Honestly, it's awesome. I remember hearing it for the first time as a kid, and you know, my mother tried to surround me with classical music, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. And this piece was right up my alley because they said, listen to the flute, it's a bird. And I was like, oh, it is a bird. It's so awesome. He's very direct. Now, I mention this and I stress it because the original librettist, the person that was going to write out the narration for this, got fired. Prokofiev was upset because they tried to make it kind of sing-songy and they made it rhyme and they made it real childish, and he said, no. It needs to be direct. We're trying to teach the kids something. I want them to know exactly what we're talking about. So the narration to this is extremely forward. It's very pointed. He's telling you exactly what's happening. But what I don't want to be lost on you is that after you hear the narration, sometimes during the narration, the music is supposed to emulate what the narrator is explaining. The challenge I have for you, are you ready for this? It's your challenge. Do you think the music does what the narrator says it is doing? I really want you to listen to this evening's concert and tell me, when the grandfather appears, does it sound like a grandfather? When the cat comes sneaking out of the bushes, do you hear a cat? When Peter makes his entrance, it's the very first thing the full orchestra is going to play, and I see some people already humming their head. This is what you need to do. Be prepared to listen for that. Do you see a little Russian boy? Or does he look like a little boy from Texas? What does he look like? Right? What is happening in this music when Peter opens the gate to the meadows? Is he happy? Is he frolicking? Maestro brought up a really good point. Prokofiev set this tempo very slowly. A lot of recordings that you hear a lot of times you experience is pretty spry. And in the Disney cartoon, they have this little blonde child who's bouncing up and down with blue eyes. Not blonde people in Russia. Have you been to Russia? It's cold, they've got dark hair, and they're not that happy. This kid is all over the place. Prokofiev originally sets this at a slow tempo, and now I'm stealing this from Richard, so I'm going to give him credit. He brought up a great point. He said, I think Prokofiev made it kind of slow because let's really think about the story. This kid is staying with his grandfather, right, over the summer. Probably not a lot to do. Probably kind of spoiled because the parents are going to send him off for the summer because they're tired of dealing with him. Grandfather says, stay in the meadow. What's the very first thing he does? He leaves the meadow. This isn't a really good kid, right? He's probably kind of portly. He's probably not. Yeah, da 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 da. It's sort of like, whoo, da 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 da. I need cake, right? This isn't a kid that's jumping all over the place. It's a slower melody that Prokofiev writes. Why does he do that? Don't let the tempos and the speed of this music be something that you ignore. How fast do we take it compared to the recordings that you've heard? Right? How loud? How soft is it? Use a lot of the music jargon and the musical experiences you're going to have this evening to make your decision. Remember your challenge. Is what the narrator's saying really coming across when the orchestra plays everything? So we've got Dana Suesse writing this incredible piano concerto that gets put into the orchestra's hands. Are we really hearing a foxtrot and the blues and a rag? And then we hear Prokofiev trying to introduce us to the orchestra. Do we really hear what he's narrating? And lastly, Respighi. Now, how many people have heard the ancient airs and dances? The first suite, second, or third? Okay, great. How many people are fans of Respighi? Know the Pines of Rome or some of his other works? Okay. How many of you that have both hands raised appreciate how different the works are? Respighi's works are usually, they sound like film scores. They're incredibly lush and picturesque. It's not so much about melody than it is effect and harmony and colors. I mean, he's really big about painting pictures. And then we get these ancient airs and dances, which are very strict, they're very rigid, they're very proper. Respighi's kind of the odd duck out this evening. I haven't talked about the Haydn yet, that's intentional, I didn't forget it. We've got Haydn. Haydn was a child prodigy. Started at a young age. He was known as a singer, and he was recruited to be a chorister when he was younger, sent off to school to study music. We know that Dana Suesse had this incredible career. Prokofiev also was a prodigy, and had supposedly written his first opera by the time he was 9. So there was, it's upsetting, isn't it? It's upsetting, it's okay. I think I was still picking boogers when I was 9. I wasn't writing music, that's for sure. So we've got all these child prodigies, and then we have Respighi. Now I feel for Respighi, because if you read his bio, this is what it says, and as a musician I can read into this. It says, Respighi started studying violin at an early age with his father. Yes, I know that very well, right? This is one of those things where I'm sure here's little Ottorino, right, getting out of the kitchen and having a good time, and now you will learn music. Right? He wasn't necessarily a child prodigy. He went through the hard way, went through school, got several degrees, and he was actually an incredible music historian. He specialized in 16th and 17th century Italian folk music, madrigals, lute music, and that was kind of his specialty, was traditional lute music. All of the melodies that you hear through the ancient airs and dances are actually all original lute tunes from the 17th, 16th century. And he was a big part of codifying those, creating a catalog for them, tracing their development in history. So these are very traditional melodies in the Italian way. And he's taking them, originally for solo lute, and blowing them up and putting them in the hands of orchestra. Just like Suisse took this piano concerto, blew it up into orchestra. What does that do to the piece? This, honestly, I'm excited that it's last on the program, because I think you're going to have the most fun listening to this piece. Now a lute, if anybody's unsure, a lute's kind of like a guitar. It looks quite different, but it works the same way. It's a set of strings, it's played like a guitar. Imagine everything that you hear in these ancient airs and dances this evening being for one solo guitar. But now, it's for a full symphony orchestra. What does Respighi do? What does he accomplish by putting it in the hands of the orchestra? Is it effective? Does it sound medieval, Baroque? Does it sound like it's from the Renaissance? Do these sound like 17th and 16th century lute songs? Or have they been transformed by the orchestra, by the power of the orchestra and the sounds that it can create? This, for me, again, is one of the most exciting pieces on the program, because it has changed dramatically from its original form as these Renaissance lute solos, and suddenly it's in the hands of a full symphony orchestra. I really think you're going to enjoy listening to that and trying to appreciate the process that Respighi took to get from the originals to the product that you hear this evening. So we've got these three pieces that are being taken over by the orchestra. You're going to hear what the orchestra can really do. But we start the program with the Haydn. Now, I'm not sure if anybody knows of this opera specifically. I can be brutally honest, I don't necessarily jog in the morning with my iPod tuned to a whole bunch of Haydn operas. Right? He wrote about 13 of them. Haydn was, however, an incredibly prolific composer, and he joins the club we've started this evening to child prodigies. Right? He's a part of that lineage. So he's in tow with them as a young singer doing his thing. But I appreciate Haydn because he worked for what he had. Now, a lot of you might know of Haydn blossoming and having his career with Prince Esterhazy, right? That was his big post. That's what made him famous. He was with them for over 20 years. That's where he got to write a lot of his music, and that's where he had his claim to fame. Now, before all that happened, he had a pretty tough situation. He got kicked out of the course because his voice changed, and he thought it would be funny if he cut the ponytail of the person in front of him off in the middle of a rehearsal. He got kicked out. He wasn't the best kid. He was, kind of ornery, liked to talk a lot because he was creative. And when he got kicked out, being a chorister, he went, tried a couple trades for a while, but knew that he wanted to stick with music, so he took up piano, took to it immediately, flourished with it, taught private lessons for a while, and worked his way up through the aristocracy. He met the right people, gave private lessons to the right people so that he got a title, which was important for him to get into a court. Once he was in a court, he worked for a few years, started writing his first few symphonies until he got with Prince Esterhazy. And with the Esterhazy family, who were incredibly rich, he had at his disposal a full symphony orchestra, but this man worked. Bach is the only other person I think that was working harder in his lifetime, because not only was he writing music every day, not every week, every day a new work. In fact, there are stories that Prince Esterhazy used to tell him the night before, "I'd like to wake up to a beret." Could you imagine? And he'd say, all right. You go write something out, give it to the musicians before the morning so they could be in the chamber and be able to play this beret for when he wakes up. This weekend I'm entertaining, I'd like a symphony and a ballet. So by the end of the week, he had to have a symphony and he had to have a ballet. It's amazing the output that he had. He had over 108 symphonies. Over 108. This is incredible what he accomplished. In fact, Haydn is known as the father of the symphony, and also father of the string quartet. He helped codify a lot of the things that we attribute to traditional style and traditional use of the orchestra. Now, the symphony was not something that had always been around. In Haydn's lifetime, it took its form and it took its shape. And of course, Haydn was incredibly influential on Mozart and Beethoven, two great symphonists that we know from the classical into the Romantic era. So Haydn had a lot of impact on people. And why I'm so grateful that this work was actually programmed first is because you're going to get to hear from the master's pen what an orchestra was traditionally. You're going to have a really good basis as to compare everything else in the program. Because we want to know, what should an orchestra sound like? Right? What is the precedent? Where do we start in our musical journey? Well, we can start with the Haydn. Now, this opera, Il Mondo della Luna, right? The World on the Moon, is actually kind of messed up. He wrote this for one of the younger son's weddings, and I'll give you the abridged version of the story because it's too good to pass up. There is a wannabe astrologer that lives in this little village, and a benefactor who has two very pretty young daughters. Well, the young astrologer decides that he's going to trick the benefactor, and he invites him over, and he has a telescope set up, and it's pointed at the moon. And he's looking through it, and the benefactor comes in and he says, "Oh, what do you got over there? What are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, this is great. I've got this amazing magic machine that allows me to see onto the world that is on the moon. And it's so strong that I can see through walls, I can see through doors and curtains and clothes, and I can see all the naked ladies on the moon." And the benefactor says, "Well, I need to see this." So he walks over to the telescope, and while he's looking through the telescope, the astrologer has some of his friends and students put little shadow puppets on the other end. And he's asking them the whole time, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" And the benefactor's like, "No, I think I see something. Maybe if I, oh yeah, there it is." And he totally falls for it. He thinks that he can see, he comes up with all these stories. "I see a man beating his wife because he's jealous. And I see a young boy that's being scolded by his mother, and I see a very pretty girl." And he comes up with this whole thing that's on the moon. So when he leaves, the astrologer realizes, I can use this to my benefit. Another one of his friends, who is scheming to get us his daughters, says, "Let's make up some story where we can convince him that he's going to travel to the moon. And we'll bring his daughters there and find a way that we can marry them, because we're too poor to marry them. He doesn't want us to give the dowry. He doesn't think we're good enough for his daughters, but we can trick them." So the astrologer shows up to the benefactor and says, "You'll never guess what? The emperor of the moon has invited me to a feast, and I'm going to bring you as my guest." And this is where I kind of don't feel bad for the benefactor, because he goes, "That's great. The solution is this: you're going to drink this magic potion, which smells like alcohol. You're going to keep drinking it until you fall asleep, and it's going to magically transport you to the moon." And the benefactor says, "That's great." So he gets drunk and falls asleep, and when he wakes up, they've decorated his apartment as if he were on the moon. And they're walking around in costume, and they bring out his daughters in disguise, and they say, "As our Earth guest, we would like you to be a part of one of our marriage ceremonies." And he gets duped into marrying his daughters to these two tricksters. He's not very smart. I didn't say he was, okay? So when the wedding ceremony is over, they all take off their costumes and go, "Ah, you're just drunk, you weren't on the moon," and he freaks out, and so they lock him in the room and leave him there for a few days while they celebrate with the new dowries that they have. Now I want to back up for a second in case you didn't forget. Haydn wrote this for one of the prince's sons who just got married. Haydn was ballsy. I'm going to put that out there. I'm just going to let you know that, because I'm not doing that to my boss. There's no way. So at the end of the story, like every good classical opera that's being written in a weekend, The finale is one thing. If you read the synopsis of this opera, if you look it up, there's all this going on in Act 1 and Act 2. In Act 3, this is all it says. The benefactor realizes that he was being stingy with his daughters, he is released, and everybody celebrates. The end. My thought was that that might have been Friday night, that third act got written, right? And they had to perform it Saturday at lunch. So it ends quite abruptly. However, the overture is fantastic. Haydn experiments with a couple new things melodically. He creates some really interesting textures with the orchestra. The conductor that's working with us this evening, one of the apprentices, is actually